Okay, welcome to the WPIAL Blitz Show. My name is Bruce Badgley. As always, my partner in this process, my buddy Ian McMeans. And Ian, we've got a very special guest with us to start the program tonight, don't we?
We do. We have Newcastle head coach Fred Mazzocco, who was kind enough to stay up late to join us this evening. But thanks, coach, for joining us after the long weekend, and congratulations on the 2-0 start to the season.
Yeah, thank you, Ian and Bruce, both for having me on this evening. It's always great to come on a show like yours and promote your program and talk about your athletes as well.
So, for folks who may not know or have followed it as closely as we do, this is your first year at Newcastle. You took over a program that won 2 games the last cycle. They were 2-18 over the last 2 years, and it had kind of been on a downtrend. So, now you're off to a 2-0 start. Did you kind of see the building blocks of this throughout the offseason, that they were starting to turn things around, and kind of what was the state of the program when you took it over to get it to here? Because this is quite the accomplishment to go from 2 wins in 2 years to 2 wins in 2 weeks.
Right. Well, I came in right before Christmas and we started right away in the weight room. And from there, it just built. We built momentum. My coaches and I have been with these young men ever since then. And we sort of set some building blocks for them, where we wanted them to be, what we wanted to achieve. And they've bought in. They've put a lot of time and effort into the season. And we told them if they do these things, we could have success on Friday nights. And so far, we've been lucky enough, to get the ball bouncing our way and some good things happening for us. And right now, we sit at 2-0.
You were at a program, for a good bit of time before you came to Newcastle. And so how has the process been? I mean, it's more of a chemistry thing now, right? I mean, getting to know everybody and getting everybody on the same page, understanding personalities is obviously that it's got to be still a work in progress. But how long did it really, take for you to kind of get that, like you talked about, that momentum going?
Right. Well, one of the things when I took the coaching job, one of my things that I asked the school district, if I were to take it, I wanted to be in the building. So that's been a huge help to me, getting to know the young men, not only at football workouts and football practice, but during the day I'm there for them as well if something arises. I'm the athletic director at the school now as well. So I have constant contact with these young men. And, since I took over the program, myself and all my assistant coaches, we're sort of hands-on with these guys. We're all together, coaches, players, we're all together, 5, 6, 7 days a week since December. So we've been able to get that learning curve and, getting to know each other. We've been able to turn that corner pretty quickly.
And you guys had an absolute battle against General McLean in week one. It was, I think, 49-47, kind
Yes.
of back and forth all game. Last year on the show, we talked to Knox head coach, and they turned around from a 1-9 season to an 8-2 season. And, he said that, winning those first couple close games early in the season was really important to kind of build their confidence that they could win those close games. How important was that General McLean win in a close matchup to kind of set the stage for the rest of the year?
Right. It was a huge win for us. And that's a veteran football team up there in Edinburgh. And, they have some really great offensive weapons and they have a great coaching staff and do some great things. So to be able to come out opening night against that veteran football team was a huge win for us. And, about 8 minutes left, they had taken the lead on us. And we looked around at that time and, met eyes with the players and called them together and just said, hey, this is what we've been working for now. Now we got to put this together and come back and win this football game. And, in previous years, I guess that hadn't happened. And, they were up to the challenge and we were able to forge ahead and win that football game. But it was an exciting game for the fans, not for me.
What's the single biggest challenge for a first year head coach?
Well, I think the first thing in my case here at Newcastle was just bringing back the discipline part of the program. Requiring people to be accountable to the football team, to each other, And, that was a big part of it to start. Everybody had to commit, and everybody had to buy into what we were preaching. And we've been fortunate enough so far. The majority of our kids have stayed with us, and they've bought into the program. And so far, the results are showing on the football field.
So one of the things we like to do on this show is to try and give shout outs to the guys on the field who don't get all the press, which is the linemen, the guys in the trenches. Because I'm a big believer that everything in football starts in the trenches. So, it's easy to find stats on quarterbacks, running backs, all those guys who, put up the great numbers. But do you want to give some shout outs to your linemen on both sides of the ball? Because we like to try and publicize their names as much as we can,
Sure,
too.
no doubt. The first one that comes to mind for me is Marcos Diaz. He's our senior center and also plays defensive line for us. Brian Williams, he's a offensive tackle and defensive end. He's done an outstanding job for us. First year player, by the way. So, we sort of plucked him out of the halls. Also, Demetrius Fambro, Hank Ritter, Joey Picaro, Jaden Schaefer. Those guys have just done a tremendous job for us, working and getting better and better each week.
And anybody named Tank, I mean, you
Hank.
got to do a good job on your line, right?
That's right.
Not to
Well,
spoil
that's
too
good.
much about not to spoil too much about what's coming later in the show, but I have a little tidbit about Newcastle football history coming later. So any Newcastle fans watching, stay tuned later in the show. We've got another fun little tidbit on Newcastle history.
How difficult has it been, Coach? I mean, obviously, first year head coach, so many coaches will, tailor your offense and defense relative to the personnel, that you have. So have you been able to do that, or did you just bring in systems and then try and fit in the guys into the systems that you brought in?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. We first went and started our offensive system back in probably 2007 when I was an assistant at Newcastle. Mark Mangino, Newcastle native, was at Kansas at the time. And Frank Bonjavingo Jr. was the head coach here at Newcastle. And our staff reached out to Coach Mangino. We went out there and, we basically sat with him and his coaching staff for a week, and we learned his offense, his spread offense, and we brought it back to Newcastle High School. And it's evolved over the years since then. We've added things and subtracted things and updated things that we needed to, but that's still the basis of our offensive football here at Newcastle right now. And I took that up to Neshannock as well. Of course, like you said, you tweak it every year, depending on the athletes you have at certain positions, things you do well and things you don't do well. So yeah, it's a good system. It works. It's been successful for us. If you look over the years, we've scored a lot of points. So, and it's worked so far this year.
So you're scoring a lot of points this year too.
Yeah.
It's worked very well. So moving from a smaller school in Neshannock to a larger school in Newcastle, what do you think the biggest challenge is coming up in classification? Because Neshannock was very successful in 2A, and now you're up in a 4A school.
Yeah, could you repeat that real quick? You cut out for a second.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. So moving from a 2A school in Neshannock up to a 4A school in Newcastle, what do you think the biggest challenge is, just with the increase in size and classification?
Yeah, I think, it's football's football. It's still, you're watching film, you're picking out strengths and weaknesses of your opponents. You're putting your game plans together. So that stuff really doesn't change. I think the biggest thing that I had to overcome coming to Newcastle now is the amount of players that we have. We're dealing now with, usually between 35 and 40 players at Neshannock. Now I have in between 55 and 60. So that changes practice. That changes everything that you do in preparing for a practice, getting JV guys their reps. You got to make sure they get reps because at the same time you're preparing for varsity games, you want to develop those younger guys as well. So that's been something new for us that we've been working on as we move forward here.
Yeah, and that's been one of the things that I've done a lot of coaches interviews, at least out here in the East here, District 3, and what have you. And that is really something that I think that the fans lose sight of the fact that there's got to be a long-term plan that each coaching staff has to put together to make sure that the cupboard isn't bare year after
Right.
year after year. Developing players. How difficult was that? Obviously, you're just coming in with these guys for the first time.
Yeah. Well, we've been at it for a long time. I've been coaching now for probably 35, 36 years. This is my 13th year as a head coach, and my assistants have a lot of experience as well. So this isn't our first rodeo. We know what we're doing. We have a game plan in place when we come into every season, and we stick by what we know, and we just coach. We use I'm one of these I'm a head coach that lets my assistant coaches coach. So we all know our strengths and weaknesses for the most part. A lot of us have been together probably for 15 or 20 years. So that's a huge help to it. You can just look at each other on a Friday night and know what the other one's thinking. We've been together so long. And then at the same time, we have a bunch of new guys that are with us as well here at Newcastle that have brought energy to us. Some younger coaches, and they've brought a lot of energy to the program. So it's been a good mix of older, experienced coaches and bringing in some young guys at the same time to bring some energy to the program.
Wow. Well, obviously we're keeping up late. Ian, you got a final question there for Coach?
I was just going to say, you mentioned your assistant coaches. If you want to shout any of them out by name, go for it. Cause we like to get them press and airtime too. Cause like you said, they're the ones that make things tick and make things go.
Yeah. Who'd you say the coaches? You cut out again. I'm
Oh yeah.
sorry.
Your assistant coaches.
Oh, my assistant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. My offensive coordinator, Ron DePorzio, Ryan Fermi, Mark Hassan. They've been with me for a long time. We all coached at Newcastle together under Frank Bonjavingo Jr., and they were at Neshannock with me the whole time. Also, Pat Kane, who's a Newcastle legend, 3 WPIAL championships in basketball and 1 in football. So he's a highly decorated coach there for us, and everybody knows Pat at Newcastle. Also, Jordan Lyles, one of our former players at Newcastle. Gianni Oliva played for me at Neshannock. Peyton Weaver, my son Mike Mazzacco, Avia, who played for us at Newcastle, and Mark Kaiser, our strength coach. So, and one more guy, a newcomer, Jake Materitz, who joined us this year as well. So, like I said, we got a great mix of older coaches and younger coaches. And we all feed off of each other's strengths and weaknesses, and everybody does their part. So it's been a great ride so far.
Awesome. Well, best of luck this season and moving forward in the future. And thanks so much for taking the time to join us tonight, Coach. We really appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you, Bruce and Ian. I appreciate it.
All
Go
right.
Kings.
Best of luck. Best
Thank
of
you.
luck.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Take care. Just exit out.
All righty. Thank you.
All right. Wow. And lo and behold, we've got Coach Hanson right here, ready to join us. Perfect timing.
From South Allegheny High School. Yeah. Head coach Brian Hanson. We are very happy to have Coach Hanson joining us this evening. It's I've kind of followed his career a little bit because he was the head coach at West Green before he came to South Allegheny, and he was the coach when West Green back in 2019 won their first playoff game since 1993. So Coach Hanson has had a really cool kind of trajectory to his career, and now at South Allegheny, similar to Coach Mazzacco that we just talked to from Newcastle. Coach Hanson had a program that was 1-9 each of the last 2 years. Won 2 games total last cycle, and now has won 2 games in 2 weeks. So as Coach Hanson joins us here, we're very excited to talk to him about the turnaround that his program has had.
Yeah, that's been one of the things that we've always strived to do, and that is, the programs that are on the rise, and that. So, and there he is.
Figuring this out a little bit.
That's okay. That's all right. I mean, the best part, I'll be honest with you, the best part about Zoom is the fact that it allows us to have the opportunity to talk to coaches and really people, all around. And that's the best part. And Coach Brian Hanson from South Allegheny,
Allegheny.
thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We really appreciate you taking the time. So, Coach, going from, I know you weren't there for the whole time of the last cycle, but South Allegheny won 2 games in 2 years and now 2 games in 2 weeks, and in decisive fashion so far this year as well. So what's the tenor like around the program now that you are starting to turn the corner and have had this turnaround early this season?
I think there's a lot of excitement within the team and the program as a whole. Um, you know, uh, One of my assistant coaches the other day said that he went back and looked at the records for the last 20 years, and South Allegheny's averaged 2 wins a year for the last 20 years. Um, we're starting to charter in new territory, so there's a lot of excitement around it.
That's great. And there's been a lot of investment too. You guys got a new turf field a couple years ago too. So I'm sure that all kind of helps build the program as well. I remember when I was in high school, we played at the old South Allegheny Stadium, and it was very old.
Yes, we have a beautiful facility, great turf field, great stands, press box. The kids couldn't ask for more. But yeah, I still, travel down to Glassport and see the old stadium, stand there. It's one of the old style concrete style stadiums and stuff. So, but yeah, we're very happy with what we have.
Well, good stuff. So, with each particular year, you've got obviously a whole new set of guys and what have you. Obviously, you've had an off season to, kind of mold into a unit. But, for you as a head coach in developing chemistry, for your team, how long do you think that truly takes before you really have a good grip on the group of guys that you're going to have go out there on Friday nights?
I think there's two different scenarios. I think it depends on what type of culture you're walking into versus, when I was at West Green, there were some really good concrete um, variables, I guess you want to say, that allowed me my first year to just kind of pour gasoline on fire. There was the kids had some success. I think they were 6-4 or 7-3, something 6-4, slightly above 500 for 2 years in a row. And I was able to come in there and like I said, just really push buttons to try to elevate the program. Here, a lot of these kids have never experienced success, so it's a I want to say a more difficult process. It's teaching them. Uh,
They always say you have to learn how to win.
you do, and it's just changing that culture. I'm an Ephrata graduate, so I don't know if you know Chris
Oh,
Miller.
I'm very, very
Yeah.
close with Chris. In fact,
So
it's
Chris's moniker, and I think he stole it from Anthony Sadasante about win all day,
uh-huh.
and that's kind of what you have to do. You've got to teach your kids that, every decision you make will influence what takes place on that athletic or whether you're in the classroom or on the athletic field. And it's talent matters, there's no question, but to really that where you feel like your culture is going in the right direction, it's creating winnable moments throughout the day.
Yeah, and just a quick story, with Chris there. It's I saw him at our media day, like in early August, and we just kind of looked at one another, and they had such a magical season last year, and speaking on the fact, hey, the last time that we spoke was on, Thanksgiving morning.
Yeah.
Got out there to practice and talk to him then. And it was pretty special. So yeah, Chris Miller over there at Ephrata really changed things around. And
Yes.
I digress. We digress to our Eastern PA roots
Yes.
here. So I'll let Ian take this over.
Okay.
I'm outnumbered here. It's no, it's all good. In football in Western in Pennsylvania as a whole is just awesome everywhere you go.
Yep.
Whether it's Lancaster or Greene County or Glassport or
Yep.
Lawrence County, wherever it is, you can go find good, enjoyable football. So one of the things we like to try and do on the show too is to give shout outs to the guys on the team who don't get all the headlines, namely the
Yep.
linemen, because I'm a big believer everything starts in the trenches. So, not to say that, the Brian Cortez and Cam Epps and those guys don't deserve all the headlines that they
Yep.
get because they're great players. But I always feel like the linemen don't get as much press. So if you want to give a shout out to some of your dudes
Oh
in the
yeah.
trenches.
So as a whole, that five starting linemen, they've made since the last game of the season, they've made 90+% of all their workouts. That's like 4 days a week, and they've been the most consistent group. And they're still a young group. We have one senior on as a starter. His name is Island Akuin, and he's a big kid. He missed some of our troubles last year were due to injuries, and Island missed about 7 games last year, maybe 8. Having him back has been a really great, just a great addition. Peyton Ashmeller, he's a starting guard for us. Bryce Guest is our center. Um, Leighton Adams is an undersized guard, but man, he gives you everything he has. And then my son, Marcus Hanson, is our starter at left tackle. But the guys they've played well these first 2 games and including our scrimmage. So um, I'm excited to see what they do because they come to work every day.
And for you and seeing these guys now with some initial success, so how do you keep them grounded?
Well, this year I've hired some really good coaches, additions to the staff, and we constantly talk to the kids that we're going to hold a standard. And part of that standard is we it's not just coach speak, but we firmly believe the most difficult team that we'll line up against is ourselves. We do have talent, and that was one of the things I was drawn to South Allegheny as a school district. But we've got to learn how to win consistently, at practice and in the classroom, in the community. And we just, it's difficult. It's been hard because like they see the scoreboard 50 points. They've never seen anything like that before. And I'm a huge believer in it's not, the scoreboard matters for sure, but it's really matters like how do you play? Are you giving your best on every rep, every snap? And stop worrying about results and just worry about your job. So when we do it every day at practice, like our practices, the kids will tell you they're much, much more difficult than the games are.
So you've got a game this week against a Carlinton team who was 0-10 and then 2-8 last year. So, and now they're also off to a 2-0 start.
Yes.
So kind of a really cool little storyline here early in the season that, I said to Bruce a few weeks ago on the show, I felt like the WPIAL did a pretty good job this year with the scheduling to try and match up teams that were kind of on a similar path with their
Yep.
program that, they didn't put like Avella against Clairton like they did
Yeah.
for so many years. And
Yeah.
it was just, a bloodbath of 60-0 or whatever,
Yeah.
which doesn't do any good for either team really. So how are you getting your guys prepared for this week's game? Obviously, without giving away too many of your coaching secrets, but you've got a pretty important game here this week.
Yeah, Carlington is a well-coached team. They got a good offensive scheme. They've got a good defensive scheme. Coaches can tell when a program has a good coach, and uh, they've got a couple good-looking players that are playing hard. So it's going to be a challenge for us because it's going to be the first time this year that we've seen a tight end on offense.
Wow.
They run a like a shotgun wing T style offense. So, we don't see traditional wing T in Western PA that much. And this is kind of a hybrid offense. So it's going to present a challenge. Defensively, they're an aggressive bunch. So we're looking forward for Friday testing ourselves.
Yeah, and that's the thing too is now there are expectations, okay,
Yes.
that that these guys are as you spoke about, for the first time.
Yep.
So, I guess it's going to, you're going into a spot where you've never been before. So how do you lead guys through that?
I think you got to constantly remind them what got us here in the first place. We had a great off season. We had a very difficult summer training. We went out to Millersville University for Coach Contafio's camp.
Yeah.
And
See,
that
he's
was
talking coach speak. I mean, with like the East here,
yeah. A lot of those are my guys out there, even though I've been in Western PA for probably the last 20 years. But those guys, I actually played when Coach Contafio was at CV.
Oh, wow.
But we went out there. It was a great experience. We were going against 5A, 6A schools. So we just understood if we grew as a family, we would have a chance. So we don't want to damage our family. We don't want to embarrass our family. We got to try to protect our family. And if the kids just continue to buy into that, I think, success is just bound to happen.
You got a final question for Coach Hansen there, Ian?
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned a little earlier some of your assistants that you've brought on.
Yes.
If you want to give any of them shout outs
Yes.
too, always helps to, get the assistant coaches' names out there too.
So the guys that came back on my staff from last year are Marcel Washington and Charlie Davis. And Marcel is a Clareton graduate, was played on some really awesome teams there. And Charlie's a Bethel Park graduate. Did very, very well, and they both, have really helped make the transition a little easier for us. So I kind of brought on some of the Steel Valley, West Mifflin guys. Sean Zeiler, he's our defensive coordinator. Paul Saccone, he was at mainly Steel Valley and West Mifflin, but was at Bishop Canevin like a year ago. Who am I thinking? RJ Ewer, he's a Duquesne graduate, and West Mifflin, Steel Valley. They were part of the whole Paris Ford, that great run that they had. They were all on that staff. One coach that came out of the woodworks for us was Bilal Cook. I don't know if you remember Bilal, but he played at Duquesne High School, later played at University of Kansas. His son is Drew Cook, our wide receiver, and he's been phenomenal for our secondary. Really holds the standard high for the kids. Doesn't let them make excuses. And we're reaping the benefits of all those guys. I can say, like, with Ryan Cordes, Sean Zeiler's done a great job with him at the quarterback position. So it's just teaching them hard work and getting a good group of guys. Because I've been doing this long enough to know that you could be the greatest head coach in the world. If you don't have good assistants, guys that are loyal and guys that really want to coach, you'll never be able to show your abilities as a head coach. And I've been blessed this year to get some really good coaches in here.
Well, I tell you what, Coach Hansen, thank you very much for your time. It's a little bit late on a Tuesday there, but listen, we really appreciate it. You got a couple more things I can talk about now with
Yeah.
Chris and Jim,
Yep.
when I see them,
Yep.
I'll get the lowdown on you from those
Yep.
guys.
Yep. I saw Effort got a pretty big win against Mannheim on Friday.
How about that? Isn't that
Yep.
incredible?
Yep.
I mean, and it was a big win, as you said. It really
Yes.
wasn't close, and I think it was at Central.
I was impressed at Millersville with some of the athletes Effort had. They had great numbers, and I told a couple of those guys on that staff coached me in high school.
Wow.
And I said, guys, you guys got some good looking players, and you could just see the culture. The kids are, excited about playing football. And, it wasn't always like that. They were down in the dumps, unlike a lot of teams in the state of Pennsylvania. And what Chris has done there has been a great job.
But it is one of the feel-good stories in the state of Pennsylvania.
Yep.
Absolutely. So,
Yep.
well, listen, Brian,
And
thank you
Coach,
so much
oh,
for your time. Ian, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah, thanks for your time tonight. And on a personal note, you've always been really kind to me.
Yeah.
As I was kind of getting all this WPIAL Blitz stuff started, we interacted a bit when you were back at West Green. So
I remember when you came down.
yeah, yeah, I brought my family down. We went to a game, saw Ben Jackson score a big touchdown against California. That was a heck of
He's
a
a
trip.
special kid.
He was. That
Yep.
was awesome. So thank you. I really appreciate everything, all the time you've taken just to interact with me over time, and appreciate you taking time for us tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Okay, Coach, just go ahead and exit out. All
All
right.
right.
And best of luck this week.
Same to you. Talk to you later.
All
Bye.
right. Take care now. All right. All
So
right.
what
Wow.
Coach Hansen referenced there was my tour of the WPIAL, which if people have kind of followed what I've written on steelcityblitz.com for a while, I had this goal of visiting every stadium in the WPIAL. And I started pretty strong, and then COVID happened and I kind of got derailed a little bit. So I'm hoping to get back at it this year and go out and see some more stadiums. And, I I try to, I would take my kids to games, let them see some different things. If we have time, go see some historical sites because I love history. My kids love history. And, West Green was a really cool trip, but I had the opportunity to go there when Ben Jackson, their running back, was, on the cusp of, a historic season. I think he broke the WPIAL single season rushing record that year, and he was just lighting everyone up, and that was the same year that West Green won their first playoff game since 1993. So, when I go, try and figure out what schools and what stadiums I want to visit, I try and pick teams that are going to be good. And I was like, West Green's having like a historically good season. I need to go see this team now. So it was a really cool trip, and Coach was very kind to give me some insight on the program then too. So I really appreciate him and Coach Mazzocco from Newcastle for joining us
Oh
tonight.
my, yeah.
Two great stories. I mean, to win 2 games in 2 years and then 2 games in 2 weeks is just like such a crazy turnaround that, and there's a handful of teams actually this year that have done it, which I think, to one of the points you've made before, Bruce, is something not only with the 6 classifications kind of changing things up, giving teams opportunity, but also, what the WPIAL's done with scheduling this year, where they've tried to match some of these teams that are rebuilding against each other so they can play kind of like opponents and not have to play, the big boys of the world, the heavy hitters, until they get into conference play. So it can help them kind of start to build some confidence, as well as, matching up games against some historic rivals and things like that, and neighboring schools, because that always helps get people to the stadiums too.
That's been kind of, our mantra as well in the Blitz show since inception is, highlighting these schools that are rising up. I mean, if you go through all of the podcasts that we did and all of the YouTubes and everything that we did, I think that the single biggest thing that people would be able to see week in, week out is how we've been able to highlight, programs, such as Newcastle and South Allegheny throughout the entire process. And that just makes me feel good.
Yeah.
That the message is getting out there, and kudos to you for, sourcing out all these programs and teams and whatever. But all great stories, and they, the one thing that we've not run out of by far, since we started doing this program, is great stories. And that's some good stuff. So, all right, well, you're in control. Let's
All
get this
right.
puppy started.
Here we go. So this is our special Tuesday edition, since yesterday was Labor Day, and thanks to Coach Mazzocco and Coach Hansen for taking the time to join us tonight. It was really cool to be able to highlight what they've done at their respective schools. So this past week we had some weather in Western Pennsylvania, and we had a great slate of games coming in to week 1, and I was really excited about it. And we had some weather cause some problems. That lightning delays and cancellations took a lot of games off the schedule. Some of them got started. A lot of them didn't finish. And basically all these games that you see here listed were declared as no contest, which means the games essentially didn't happen. So the one thing I'm not sure about is if like stats accumulated in these games will count since the games are a no contest game. I've asked a few people and no one's real sure yet. Because like Tyke Hayes from Aliquippa has a chance this year if he gets enough rushing yards to be the fifth WPIAL player in history to run for 7,000 yards in his career. So like every yard counts for Tyke Hayes. But I don't know if the yards that he got in this game will count since it was a no contest game that like weather made it impossible to finish. So the good thing is since these were all non-conference games, it doesn't impact the overall standings, and these teams will just have one fewer regular season game than everyone else. But hopefully we can have the rest of the season go smoothly and not have weather delays the rest of the way.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Our game Thursday night and that broadcast Elko and Conrad Weiser, and man, you're just kind of looking at the sky there, and it was very interesting. But Friday went off without a hitch, so it is what it is.
Yeah, it happens. We can't control the weather, and we're not building domes for high schools.
No.
All right. So of the games that were played, we did have some big results. The biggest wins of the week were Fox Chapel and Chartiers Houston. Fox Chapel ended a 22-game losing streak. Fox Chapel went 0-10 each of the last 2 years. Interestingly enough, Fox Chapel's last win was actually in the playoffs. They won a first-round playoff game and then didn't win a game the last 2 years, and then lost in week 0, but came back, beat Baldwin handily in week 1 to end their 22-game losing streak. And Chartiers Houston, after going winless last year, beat Springdale. I spelled that wrong. There's a G in Springdale, but nevertheless, Chartiers Houston gets the win and ends their losing streak. Our 2 games of the week both went to overtime. Once again, last week we had a bunch of games go to overtime. This week we did as well. Ringgold actually has the longest losing streak overall in the WPIAL, and they went to overtime against Indiana, and did not convert the point after, and Indiana did and won.
Wow.
So Indiana got the win there. And then Highlands and Elizabeth Forward just back and forth all night, went to 3 overtimes. And if you remember last week, Highlands went to overtime against Armstrong and came up just short on a 2-point conversion attempt in overtime and lost by 1. And this week they went for 2 in the 3rd overtime and got it and won and beat Elizabeth Forward. So congratulations to the Highlands Rams, arguably the most exciting team in the WPIAL this season, having 2 overtime games that came down to a 2-point conversion. Is just kind of crazy. Pine Richland beating Central Catholic. I don't know if that's really an upset, but a 5A team beating a 6A team. I mean, we all know Pine Richland's good, but Central was kind of the presumed favorites in 6A after all the players that graduated from North Allegheny. So Central's got some work to do. I mean, they're off to an 0-2 start. Granted, their first loss was against that all-star team from Maryland, that plays a national schedule. But nevertheless, Pine Richland off to a very solid start this year and an impressive win over Central Catholic. Some other noteworthy ones: Woodland Hills beating Penn Hills, Bethel Park handily beating Mars, Thomas Jefferson beating Central Valley. Central Valley's also off to an 0-2 start, but the WPIAL didn't do them any favors with their non-conference schedule. They gave them about the hardest non-conference slate you could get. So Central Valley, kind of like Bell Vernon the last few years, once they get into the 3A schedule, I'm not super worried about them. They play in a tough conference, but they're playing higher classification opponents here now that they're back in 3A. Steel Valley bounces back from their week 0 loss to Clairton to beat Washington, and those two are some of the top contenders in 2A. And then a pretty nice story out of Greene County also. Jefferson Morgan, a 1A school, Waynesburg, a 2A school. We talked to folks from both of those schools last year on the show, but both of them were kind of rising programs, and they squared off in a heck of a game that was won on a 4th quarter touchdown by Jefferson Morgan. So overall, pretty good slate of games this week for the ones that actually played through to conclusion.
And the nice part about, I guess, rain delays too. I was down in Morgantown covering Penn State and West Virginia, and I actually had an opportunity to talk WPIAL football during the rain delay with the Cassidy Wood from KDKA, sports anchor there, and We were talking about Central Catholic. I mean, and really interested. We were definitely speaking about some WPIAL, and three teams that are on your list here were some of the teams that we were talking about: Central Catholic, Penn Hills, and Central Valley, and really anxious to see. Look, you can't just draw the curtain close on this part of the season because, you know, you talked about the fact that the WPIAL has brought in the human element into seeding in the postseason. So you can't tell me that this loss by Central Catholic isn't going to weigh in the decision making of, down the road, the same way that the loss by Central Valley, regardless of whether it's a Thomas Jefferson or even their week one loss, even if they run the table, isn't going to affect some decision making as well. So that's just my 2 cents. And but it was nice to meet Cassidy. We were talking some football, and I'm gonna have to take her up on the fact that she promised that she'd get on the show, and that Monday nights are good for her. So we'll see if we can't make that happen.
Yeah, that would be that'd be fun. It's always good to talk to, a variety of people, and everyone, especially folks on the media side have a different perspective too, because they get to see, snippets of a lot more games than, the coaches we talk to have great insights into their programs, but some people that have a broader scope too of bigger storylines that are
Well,
happening.
well, Cassidy grew up in football. Her dad was a football coach, so she grew up around football. I mean, she's been in sports her whole life. I would definitely take, her opinions on, not that I didn't share any of her opinions, on these things here, but she's got some really good opinions, and that's why I definitely want to try and get her on the show.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right, so our WPIAL Blitz Player of the Week from Highlands, who scored that game-winning 2-point conversion in the third overtime, is dual threat quarterback Minaj Lucas. And his highlights so far this season have just been like absolutely incredible. Hold on one second here. I have them. I will pull them up.
Ooh,
And yeah, what he's done on the field. These dual threat quarterbacks now just can kind of do a bit of everything. And this kid has some really nice size, and what he can do both running and throwing, making moves in a phone booth, and then has the breakaway speed to just take things all the way and the power to get through tackles. And let's not forget too, this is an Elizabeth forward team that they were playing that went to the 3A semifinals last
yeah.
year, and brought back a lot of players and a lot of talent. I mean, this was a good EF team that they beat. And for Highlands moving down from 4A to 3A, they're in a conference with Amani Christian, but they're kind of, I considered them coming into the year as the top challengers to Amani Christian in that Allegheny conference. So I think, them getting a win like this early in the year, there's a nice dart down the sideline, and and what they've been able to do. Highlands was a team last year. They had some injuries they had to work through, but just look at the power and the speed that he has to break through things. And, you know, all in all, just a great performance from Minaj Lucas and Highlands to go head to head with a tough Elizabeth forward team and come out on top in
Yeah.
overtime. So congratulations to our WPIAL Blitz Player of the Week, Minaj Lucas from Highlands. All right. So he put up 4 touchdowns and the game-winning 2-point conversion in overtime. But we had a lot of other great performances that happened this week as well. In addition to that, Gino Mazzocco from Neshannock had 5 total touchdowns. Over 100 passing yards, 165 rushing yards. Samir Crosby from Greensburg Central Catholic, who was our week 0 player of the week last week, had another 5 touchdown performance.
That's incredible.
Yeah, isn't it? I know. I was like,
There, some of these performances by these players have been crazy. There was a quarterback for Notre Dame Green Pond who's thrown for 1,000 yards already. 1,000 yards in 2 games.
2 games. That's insane. Wow.
They're averaging 63.5 points a game. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah,
I digress. But
that's wild. Yeah, but I was looking through the stats and I was like, I can't give the player of the week to Samir Crosby twice in a row, but like he has to be on the list, right? He had 5 touchdowns again.
yeah,
Donald Barksdale from Steel Valley, after Clairton held them in check last week, went off this week for 327 and 4 touchdowns. Alex Tash from Latrobe, Penn State commit, I believe. 158 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, and a receiving touchdown. He's a Penn State commit at linebacker. He's just a dynamite linebacker there for Latrobe. Darren Hayes from Shayside Academy had 4 total touchdowns, 2 rushing, 2 receiving. And then Tyvon Kershaw, might be one of the best stories, early in this young season. 5 touchdowns for Monessen, 3 on the ground, a receiving touchdown, then a punt return touchdown, kind of doing it a bunch of different ways. So congratulations to all of our top performers. And there were some other great performances that just didn't make the list. But, when I'm going through and looking at things and I'm like, 5 touchdowns, I'm like, I got to put you on the,
that's
put you on the slide.
Just incredible.
Yeah. All right. So, we talked to the coaches from Newcastle and South Allegheny, but some other teams that have had turnarounds that are 2-0 to start this season. New Brighton, who last week I think was our biggest win of the week team, when they beat Shenango 9-7 in week 0, and that 9-7 win snapped a 20+ game losing streak for New Brighton. And that 9-7 win, they got a safety and then returned the ensuing kick for a touchdown. This past week, they got a more decisive victory on Saturday over Summit Academy. So New Brighton off to a 2-0 start, and then Newcastle, South Allegheny, and Carleton, who won just 2 games over the last cycle, also off to a 2-0 start. South Allegheny and Carleton play this week, so that's kind of a fun matchup. And then Norwin also off to a 2-0 start. They moved up to 6A this year, so that's a team to keep an eye on, that after, struggling a bit in 5A the last few years, they moved up to 6A, but now they're 2-0. So we'll see how it goes.
That's almost counterintuitive.
Yeah, but they haven't played any 6A opponents yet, so we'll see how it is once they get into conference play. But they beat their rivals Penn Trafford in week 0, so that's a solid win for Norwin there. And got another good win this past week. And they've got some talent on that team. Going back to the season preview show we did with John from PA Today Sports, and he said Norwin was the team to watch in 6A. So yeah, I think they're definitely showing it early in the season. They beat a pretty solid Kiski team this past week as well. And then York, who's been kind of down the last few years as well, also off to a 2-0 start. And then Greensburg Salem, who won just 2 games last year, off to a 2-0 start as well. So yeah, some good,
obviously some teams that we may have on in the future.
Yeah. But we like to try and tell these good stories of these teams that are doing things. If I could have interviewed all these coaches this week, I would have, but we only had time for 2. So thanks to Coach Mazzocco and Coach Hansen from Newcastle and South Allegheny, but some really good stories that are happening around the WPIAL this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So our streak watch, I mentioned 2 of these, but I'll talk about the left side first. That Aliquippa and Bell Vernon had that head-to-head game that was essentially canceled. It was declared no contest because they only played into the second quarter. Aliquippa was winning 12-0 at the time the lightning happened, and then it just kept storming the rest of the night, and they weren't able to restart the game. But that was declared no contest, so both of those winning streaks technically stay alive and will continue on into the season. Some other notes on wins against just WPIAL opponents. 5 of the 6 WPIAL champions from last year have yet to lose this year. So those streaks still continue. And then on the losing streak side, Fox Chapel and Shar Houston ending their lengthy losing streaks. Fox Chapel's was a 2-year plus streak. Shar Houston's was a 1-year plus streak. So those teams getting off the schneid, and congratulations to them for ending their losing streak. Ringgold, that game went to overtime against Indiana, just didn't quite squeak it out, so their streak will continue now at 27 overall games for Ringgold. All right. as we start to move into conference play too, I thought it was worth noting, the conference winning and losing streaks. So Aliquippa and Bell Vernon, not surprisingly, have the longest conference losing streaks. The Quips haven't lost a conference game since they lost to Central Valley back in 2019, which, if you can believe it, that was it when they both were in 3A. So Aliquippa hasn't lost a conference game since they were forced up into 4A, which is just incredible. And then Bell Vernon's last conference loss was in 2020 when they were in 4A before they moved down to 3A the last couple years. Steel Valley also, their last conference loss was in 2020, the weird COVID year. And then Avonworth hasn't lost since 2021, which was Central Valley's last year in 3A before they moved up to 4A the last couple years. But now Central Valley's back in 3A, so they're in a conference with Avonworth again. So we'll see if the Lopes can keep that streak going. On the losing streak side, Ringgold has the longest conference losing streak in the WPIAL. And there are two caveats that I have here down below. So the first one is that in 2020, they beat Uniontown, but Uniontown had declared that they were playing as an independent that year, even though they kept the same schedule, basically, that they had been scheduled as a WPIAL team, but they claimed they were independent. So, that game doesn't technically count as a conference win since Uniontown was an independent. And then also Ringgold lost on the field to West Mifflin in 2019 in a game that was later changed to a forfeit victory because West Mifflin used an ineligible player. But because they lost on the field, I'm counting that as a loss for this active losing streak because there was a game played and they didn't win it. So those are the two caveats for Ringgold. Summit Academy did not play in 2020, the weird COVID year, but everyone else, their last conference win came in 2021. So some teams here have some streaks that span, all of last cycle. So we'll see if any of them are able to, get off the schneid and win some games this year.
Yeah.
All right, so now we are into week 2, where conference play begins in 6A this week. There's just one conference game that is happening this week, and the rest are all non-conference games. So the only, sorry, I'm wrong about that. I am wrong. I marked that for the wrong week. It is. I think it's next week, actually, the conference play starts for 6A. So, all right. I was wrong about that. Everyone is playing non-conference games this week. Ignore that half of that slide. Everyone's playing non-conference games this week. Next week, we start conference play. All right. Moving on. So last week, we had our buddy Draper Gilliam on, who's the WPIAL team builder. So if you have the College Football 25 game on any platform, you can go into the downloadable teams, look up the WPIAL team builder, and he's continually putting out new teams on the platform, so you can download them for free and then play as your school or your favorite school. And he's actually been updating the rosters so that, the rosters are accurate with numbers and player positions and all that, which is pretty cool. So, we talked to him last week on the show, if you want to go back and watch that interview. But our WPIAL team builder game of the week this week is Amani Christian against Beaver, two of the top teams in 3A, both undefeated so far this season. So this should be a good one. And this highlights our full slate of games this week, of pretty good matchups overall here in week 2. So we've got Aliquippa taking on Avonworth. Both of them had lightning canceled games last week. So, the Quips starting the season off, they played 2 quarters against Bell Vernon last week, but, in earnest now against an Avonworth team that was the 3A runners up the last 2 years, and Aliquippa being the 3-time defending 4A champions. So, should be a good one there. Central Catholic taking on Woodland Hills. Central Catholic, as we mentioned earlier, off to that 0-2 start after losing to Pine Richland last week. Both of those teams lost their week 0 games to out-of-state opponents. So,
technically it doesn't count.
Yeah, exactly. Central Valley 0-2 against Bell Vernon. I mean, like I said, the WPIAL didn't do Central Valley any favors here. So technically this will be Bell Vernon's first game of the year after they, got lightninged out last week against Aliquippa. Clairton taking on Shadyside Academy. I think this is noteworthy too, because Shadyside's a solid 2A team that's coming off a pretty good victory this past week. So Clairton's been hot so far. They're 2-0. They have two very impressive victories. So we'll see if they can keep things rolling. And we thought very highly of Clairton coming into the season, that they could potentially challenge for that 1A title. So it's gonna, the more they play these higher classification opponents, this is kind of an iron sharpens iron situation where they're going to be battle tested. That Carlinton South Allegheny game and a matchup of undefeated teams that we talked about earlier, undefeated teams that both only won 2 games the last cycle, now are both 2-0. So that's pretty cool. Highlands, the most exciting team in the WPIAL, having gone to overtime twice, taking on Newcastle, who, we talked to their coach at the beginning of the show, obviously. And good, strong matchup there too, to see how that one plays out. And then McKeesport against TJ, these are two teams that are expected to challenge Aliquippa for the 4A title. And McKeesport is 0-2. TJ's looked very strong so far. But I mean, McKeesport's kind of on the cusp of going 0-3 here. So this is a big game for McKeesport.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, some of the teams that I'm watching, that Central Valley Bell Vernon game, I think has, just a lot riding, not necessarily, in postseason as much as, gaining some momentum. I mean, that's the key thing for Central Valley now. I think they got to try and establish some momentum going into the league schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. And for McKeesport, they're 0-2, yes, but they lost to a team from Ohio in double overtime in week 0, and then lost to Peters Township, who's the defending 5A WPIAL champs, and McKeesport's a 4A team. So, it's not like, I mean, they lost handily to Peters Township, don't get me wrong, but it's not like I'm ready to push the panic button on McKeesport yet. I think they'll be just fine, but I think this is an important game for them against TJ, who is a former conference opponent, no longer a conference opponent because McKeesport moved to the Allegheny Conference, or the Greater Allegheny Conference in 4A. But still, I think it's important for McKeesport to have a solid showing against TJ, to kind of start to establish that pecking order, is like, who is the big challenger to Aliquippa in 4A?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so our broadcast from friends of the show this week, that McKeesport TJ game, is on KDKA radio. So our friend Dan Zangrelli and his crew at KDKA do a great job broadcasting the game. So they'll be at TJ for that matchup this week. And then on WMBS out of Uniontown, they're doing the Southmoreland Laurel Highlands game. Southmoreland has also had an impressive start to the season. They're in 3A, Laurel Highlands is in 4A, but should be a good one to kind of see how both of those teams are measuring up. Laurel Highlands was kind of down last year, but they're looking a little better so far this year. Southmoreland is a team that a couple years ago they snapped a 40-year playoff drought, and now they've made the playoffs in 4 out of the last 5 years, but have never won a playoff game. So they're working on, as we talked about earlier, right? Winning and learning how to win takes time. So now the thing for Southmoreland is not only getting to the playoffs, but winning a playoff game.
Yeah.
So this is kind of a good measuring stick game for both of those teams.
Yep.
All right. So I mentioned earlier, I teased it during our interview with Coach Mazzocco, that I had a tidbit about Newcastle history. So our weekly PA football history look back. Last week, we looked all the way back to 1914, which was the first ever WPIAL championship. So now this week, we are at 100 years ago. For the 1924 Newcastle Red Hurricanes, they defeated Charleroi 10-6. And as you may remember from last week, the first ever championship trophy was awarded by the Syracuse Alumni Association in Pittsburgh. So initially it was called the Syracuse Cup. And And in 1924, the Syracuse Cup Committee felt that the regular season had been too long, so the Newcastle game against Braddock was canceled. Interestingly enough, the Syracuse Cup Committee wanted to award the title to Braddock because they felt that Braddock had a better regular season than Newcastle, but all of the history records that I can find state Newcastle as the champion and the win over Charleroi as like the championship game. So Newcastle is declared in history as the 1924 WPIAL champions. There was only one classification back then. That was their first championship out of their 11 all time. And their coach, Philip Breidenbaugh, didn't lose a single game in his first 2 seasons, which is kind of incredible. But this is my favorite tidbit. We talked earlier about Newcastle having a lineman named Tank. This team,
Hippo.
their largest player had a dude they called Hippo who weighed 203. Like, I know 100 years ago, 1924, it was a different day and age, but I'm like, these guys had a dude who weighed barely over 200 pounds and they called him Hippo. Like, that's so fun. Like, how hilarious is that?
Oh my God. Where do we get this stuff? Thanks to our friends at PA Football History, of course.
Yes. Yeah. You can check them out on Twitter. And this tidbit too, I should mention, came from the Lawrence County Historical Society as well, who had a nice section of their website on some football history and all that. So thanks also to the Lawrence County Historical Society for that's where I found the photo, and then also the tidbit about Hippo.
Well, we may have to start renaming this to Strange but True. I mean, the Strange but True football history section. Okay.
I know, like I said, things have changed so much in 100 years, but like he weighed 200 pounds, which like nowadays is like, I mean, you have running backs who weigh more than that now, and it's like, oh, we're calling this dude Hippo because he weighs over 200. But
I'm trying to hold it together until we move this slide. So.
One other note that I'll say, from our buddies at PA Football History was, they did mention to me when I told them about the Hippo thing, and he said, back in the day, like rosters didn't have as much diversity in player size, that most players were kind of within a 20 to 30 pound kind of range of difference, and you'd have players who would play offensive line and would play guard for the first half of the game and then come in and play tailback or halfback or fullback or whatever, for the second half. So the players were a lot more kind of interchangeable because they were all kind of similarly sized back in the day. But, Hippo Twaddle, I'm going to remember that one forever.
Hippo Twaddle. Okay.
All right. So if you enjoy listening to Bruce and I talk about high school football, you can also check us out on some of our other shows. I'm part of a team that does a Steelers broadcast, the Steel City Blitz podcast. That one is a little more adult than this show, a little bit of drinking and swearing because the Steelers give us a lot to drink and swear about recently. But it's a good group of guys. We broadcast live on YouTube every Thursday night at 10. And we also, it's on every platform that you want to check it out. So you can check out the Steel City Blitz podcast for Steelers talk. And then Bruce has his Fresh Set of Downs show, which talks everything Eastern PA football.
Yeah, we actually did that live before this at 7:30. Normally, Fresh Set of Downs is Tuesday, and we do our show on Monday. But actually, we had LaSalle College's high school new head coach Brett Gordon on. Really good conversation. Got to know Brett a little bit. I mean, he's a legacy guy. Brett went to LaSalle. His dad coached there. He'd done some coaching in the program previous to becoming the head coach. Really fascinating conversation. Really worth tuning in. Fresh Set of Downs. Myself, Dave Micah from EasternPAFootball.com, and my good buddy Bob Long. Yeah, we talk everything Eastern PA football, and so just for you Pennsylvania football fans, the earth doesn't end, when you cross into, District 3 and District 4. So, Fresh Set of Downs, really, we take a lot of pride in that show, and it's a good way to keep up on everything that is football in the state. Eventually, there's a lot of good 4A teams over there in the eastern half of Pennsylvania. You should keep an eye on those teams, and Fresh Set of Downs can do that for you.
Yeah, and it's always good to kind of know what's happening out east because eventually, too, as we always say, the WPIAL champions in pretty much every classification are going to meet someone from out east as we go through the state bracket. So it's good to have a sense for what's going on and who's strong and what to look out for.
And not to be surprised.
Yes, exactly. So thanks everyone for tuning in to tonight's show. You can find us, on Facebook, Twitter, every platform. So we really appreciate everyone. You can check out my articles at steelcityblitz.com. There we go. There it is again. Obviously you can know where to find us on YouTube, but follow us on Twitter, Facebook, our rarely used Instagram account, which I should probably use more of, and then steelcityblitz.com, where I have my games of the week articles, my WPIAL standings page, and everything else. So thanks for joining us tonight, and we really appreciate the two head coaches both taking the time to join the show. I'm an amateur at this, so for us to kind of seamlessly be able to transition between multiple guests, it continually amazes me that we haven't just completely flubbed it up yet. But I really appreciate all the coaches and everyone taking their time to join our show and talk about the things that are happening with their programs.
Yeah, and we're just going to have to come up with some nicknames for both you and I for this show now, since you brought up Hippo. We're gonna have to put that up to the fans to give them nicknames for the program. So
I do not have the body frame to be called Hippo. I can say
no,
that
I'm
for
just
sure.
saying, well, don't have to be called Hippo. But anyway, hey, listen, thanks everybody for joining. Ian, incredible job again. And now we'll be back next Monday evening.
Yes.
At 9:30, because this was kind of, because of the holiday or whatever like that. But next Monday, 9:30, the WPIAL Blitz show. So for my buddy Ian, I'm Bruce Badgley. Listen, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. So long, gang.